last couple weeks have been big for realignment talk, that's for sure. And yesterday, the government got involved, and we had hearings down in Austin with people like Baylor AD Mack Rhoades testifying to Texas officials about the University of Texas and their exit from the Big 12 and how that all came about. And Mack Rhoades probably had the line of the day based on social media when talking about, Texas and Oklahoma not thinking enough of themselves as being a reason for why they left the SEC. And he sure ticked off a lot of the right people and got a laugh at a lot of the right people as well, because he triggered those who you figure would get triggered by that, and everybody else who's kind of watching this from the outside was like, sick burn, dude, and absolutely deserved. So I loved that from Mack Rhoades. But where we stand now as far as realignment goes is not much changes as a result of yesterday, no matter what Mack Rhoades said or TCU's AD or UT officials or whatever. The latest juicy rumor as far as the Big 12's future goes is from Max Olson and The Athletic. Big 12 Commissioner Bob Bowlsby is meeting with Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkoff this afternoon or this morning, and they are going to discuss the possibility of a scheduling alliance, the possibility of a merger of the two conferences, or other options for the two conferences to work together. This is actually the rumor with the Big Ten and the Pac-12 a week ago. And that rumor was more about the Big Ten potentially plucking some of the top programs from the Pac-12. That seems to have lost some steam. There was even talk of them maybe just doing, instead of, Oregon and USC and UCLA moving to the Big Ten, then perhaps there would be a scheduling alliance. That kind of ran out of steam just in terms of chatter at some point last week as well. And now you look up a few days later and the Big 12's talking to the Pac-12 about a similar possibility. So, I think we all agree the odds of a Baylor or a TCU being invited to actually be Pac-12 members is pretty slim. So that's one conference you can kind of check off in terms of, potential landing spots. But if the Big 12 is going to stick together like they were saying yesterday, and they're going to wait on this buyout money, and they're going to, work through this grant of rights agreements and all that, a partnership with the Pac-12 is not the worst idea, Grayson.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with that Senate conversation just because I wanted to add one more thing to it. Mack Rhoades had a great comment, but so did the senator who went to TCU, asking about UT's budget, and the UT guys saying, oh, yeah, it's the biggest in the country. And she said, oh, even without a winning football team. And of course, the guy answers, oh, yeah, we haven't won quite to the level that we want to, but we've won. And she goes, 3-7 against the Horned Frogs. I guess you'd rather lose to Alabama. Oh,
yeah. I don't know how much of a Senate hearing that was. Is just a roast of Texas is kind of what it came across as.
Yeah. And Chris Del Conte decided he wasn't going to show up because he's smart to not show up. And he just left the president there to go answer those questions. So that was really funny. But back to your question, or kind of just the comments, the general comments about the Pac-12. I found it really interesting that that Bowlsby was going to go have this meeting with the AD of the Pac-12. And the reason I say that is because, we've heard all this talk about how Baylor and TCU won't be a part of the Pac-12. And while that's probably true, I think things could change if it becomes just a merger between the two conferences. I think that's a little bit different than talking about just taking Baylor and TCU to the Pac-12, because a merger to me kind of tells me that, they'll probably come up with a new name, a new branding, new kind of everything if that were to happen. So both contracts come up in 2025, I believe. And so I think everyone's just kind of preparing for it. And so good for Bowlsby. He seems to have changed his attitude and his mindset. Probably because he's fighting for his job right now and fighting for the conference right now after he just completely botched the entire situation with Texas and Oklahoma. But good for him. I'm happy with the steps he's taken. At least he's trying to figure out every potential opportunity. I do agree with you. I think the schedule alliance is probably more likely than a complete merger. But I will say I think it's good that the Big 12 is coming together and saying, okay, Bowlsby, let's go make something happen. We're all going to stand together. That's what the Senate meeting also kind of told me a little bit, gave us a little insight into that. And so for me, I just think it shows the Big 12 is like, you know what, we're going to stay together. We're going to try to figure this out together and try to go somewhere together instead of completely dissolving and losing all that money that they could make from ESPN, Oklahoma, and Texas. So I think this is a positive development if you're a Baylor fan or really any fan of the new Big 8.
I just wish we had seen this Bob Bowlsby, before the last 2 weeks. Like, where's this guy been? Where's this guy who's like, I'm not taking any blank and we're going to fight? And we're like, where's this dude been the entire time that he's been commissioner of the Big 12? That's my one major issue with this whole thing is this is what you should have been doing all along. And even if you were, it didn't come across that way. Instead, he kind of came across as sort of like, like whatever. And, who cares that I didn't pick somebody to represent us in the college football playoff originally? And, like, it's just like there's no doubt. And he knows better than anybody. There's been some missteps, and no one was more embarrassed by the whole Texas OU thing than Bob Bowlsby. I mean, he was completely blindsided, and there was no excuse for it, really, except for the fact that it was clearly and intentionally hidden from him and other people. So I can't blame him all the way for being surprised because this was clearly a very small circle of people that were made aware of what was going on. But he does look dumb. And so I've loved seeing kind of this fire from him. I don't think he's some pushover type of guy, believe it or not. Like, if you're around him, you kind of pick up on his personality. Like, I can see where he's had his battles before. You know what I mean? He's definitely stood up for himself a time or two. But, that's not necessarily been apparent in watching him kind of guide the Big 12. So, yeah, to go from the media days sort of just like, whatever, just no worries in the world to a week later and all the worries in the world. And then to see some of his comments, I've loved it. I found it interesting, and I just wish he would have been like this a lot sooner. But, the Pac-12 thing is interesting. I don't know that we'd see like an outright, brand new conference, like a phoenix rising out of the ashes, but maybe there is a little bit of rising out of the ashes for the Big 12 conference as a result of this. So I'm very interested to hear more about, the conversation that takes place today with Bowlsby and Kliavkoff, and to see where other conversations might take them. I mean, I don't think any Big Ten alliances in the future. I think, that's a conference that's kind of got to go the SEC route probably, but certainly not bad to be having, a little bit of conversation about some other possibilities with the future as murky as it is based on the last week or so. But I thought Mack Rhoades handled himself pretty well. Definitely had the line of the hearings, that's for sure. And, also mentioned like, hey, this affects our projects like the basketball arena. And I saw a bunch of people go, well, why is that? They got a $100 million donation like a few months ago. Well, that wasn't for just the basketball arena. That was like the Give Light campaign, which is $1 billion+. That was a portion of that $1 billion+ that they've been raising, with a certain amount of that certainly going to the arena. But it wasn't outright like, hey, here's $100 million for only the arena. So that's where that comes into play. Not to mention when you're putting into account the cost and things like that moving forward and the money you're going to be making, you're relying on what you expect you're going to be getting from the Big 12 for the next 5 years, which is $30-something million. And seeing as how they've had some growth the last couple of years, probably approaching 40, something like that by 2024. So, yeah, all of a sudden you have to take that out of the accounting book, and you're like, wait a second. So we have not had the opportunity to talk to Mack Rhoades. We're expecting to be able to do that sooner rather than later. And I look forward to being able to do that. As a matter of fact, it looks like we're supposed to get him today on the show. So interested to hear what Mack Rhoades has to say about all that's going on in college football realignment. But still a lot of dust left to settle, that's for sure.